I have been doing assisted living since 2012. Have owned and operated since 2012. Prior to that, I grew up in assisted living. So my mom started an assisted living facility in 80, 96, something like that. 94, 94. I think it was 94. Yeah, so 1994. So it's been 30 years, pretty much. I grew up in an assisted living home my whole life, pretty much, until I got married. I married a little nurse. My high school sweetheart from French class is where we met. Ended up going, didn't realize we went to the same church. And anyway, started dating in high school and college and got married right after college. She's a nurse. She also comes from a family that has done assisted living, senior care, even longer than my family has. They're close to 40 years now. So this is something that's in our blood. In 2012, uh, I have a business degree, management and ethics, and with my wife being a nurse, her parents had asked us to come and take over the family business pretty much. They're quasi retired and they wanted us to take over. They had a couple of facilities and we ended up taking ownership and operations over the other facility they had. And so, like I said, we did that since 2012 and really just love the senior care space, love the business. We were primarily focused on assisted living in a residential setting. So, and what I'm referring to is a smaller type of assisted living facility. And we'll get into sizes and how we delineate those distinctions between smaller facilities and larger facilities and what assisted living means. So all of that. Let's see if I can share my screen. Is this it? Let's see. Nice. Look at that.
Oh,
So, what is assisted living? Okay. Assisted living it's a segment of the senior housing industry. Okay. Senior housing is kind of like a big bucket that has multiple things in it. Has independent living, has assisted living, memory care. You'll hear other things like skilled nursing and nursing homes. We'll talk about those a little bit. Skilled nursing is more of a short term, kind of a rehab type of facility, whereas independent living, assisted living, memory care, and even nursing homes are typically longer term. They're long term care type of facilities, right? They're usually not the kind of places where you go to rehab after an injury and then you're back home in 2 weeks. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about more long term based care. So these are all segments of senior housing. Now, each of these segments in turn is broken down into distinctions that are based on ADLs. Okay. Now, what are ADLs? So ADLs refers to activities of daily living. And before we talk about what is assisted living, how can we start an assisted living, like this whole thing starts with there is a person who is not able to be as independent as they were once. And now they need an alternative to being independent, to being in their own home. And so we're talking about what happens once these people need help. And the way we determine what happens to these people, the way the state government determines what happens to these people, is based on ADLs. Okay, so what are ADLs? They represent key life tasks that people need to manage in order to live at home and be fully independent. Now, most of these things we learned to do when we were toddlers, right? We learned how to walk, we learned how to feed ourselves with our spoons, we learned how to use the restroom appropriately. But all this stuff comes rearing back to life at the end of a person's, toward the end of a person's life. Okay. Difficulties with ADLs often correspond to how much help, supervision, and hands-on care an older person needs. These ADLs, and the reason I put these words in here specifically because there within one ADL there's multiple layers, right? There's a lot of complexity here. My hope with explaining all this stuff is that you can see that there's a lot of complexity because this business is complex. It's not a quick thing where we're going to be able to overnight turn our house into an assisted living. There's a lot of investors looking to do assisted living. It's very complex. It takes a lot of time to do, and it takes a lot of specific skill and specific industry knowledge in order to make this happen. And all of this starts with ADLs. Okay, ADLs, they determine the cost of care, right? The more ADLs a person needs, the more expensive that could potentially be. ADLs determine whether a person is considered safe to live at home, or they can also determine whether someone is eligible for long-term care services that is sometimes paid for by long-term care insurance. Okay. Now, when do we assess people for their ADLs? We assess people before they move in. So what does that scenario look like? It looks like this. Let's say you have a facility, you get a call from Wendy, and Wendy has called because her mom fell and just can't be at home by herself anymore. She forgets to take her meds. She leaves the stove on and burns things. Um, you know, so she's called you, and now she's concerned about her mom. So what we do now is we need to go and we need to evaluate Wendy's mom based on her ADLs. Now, this is something that is required by state law. ADLs, so evaluating a person to determine their specific need is required by state law, right? You have to evaluate people. Now, what are ADLs specifically that we're talking about? The basic self-care tasks that we learn as young children. They include walking, getting around the house, inside, outside, technical terms, ambulating. Another ADL is feeding, being able to feed yourself, getting the food from the plate into your mouth. Dressing and grooming, picking out clothes, being able to put them on, putting shirts on appropriately, being able to put pants on appropriately, being able to put socks and shoes on appropriately. Toileting, which is getting to and from the toilet, using the facility appropriate, and maintaining hygiene. Bathing is another ADL, being able to wash your face, your body, your hair in the bath or shower safely. And transferring is another ADL. Transferring from the bed to the chair to a wheelchair, being able to stand, being able to use a walker appropriately, being able to walk the distance from, let's say, from your bed to the dining room Those are all things that fall under the transferring ADL. Okay. Beside these ADLs, even these, each ADL has layers to it because we have to determine how far along a person is in each ADL. So, for example, let's talk about bathing. You know, some of these interplay, right? So, can a person appropriately and safely get into the shower or into the bathtub? That's transferring. And once they're there, do they know how to turn the water on and not burn themselves or freeze to death? And then once they're in the bath, can they appropriately lather up, you know, a cloth and wash themselves properly? So, or can they not? Or do they simply just need queuing? Or do they simply need standby assistance? All of these are specific terms that the government uses to determine how independent or how much care a person needs in each ADL. And we'll go through that very detailed in just a little bit here. So for each ADL, people can vary from needing just a little help, such as a reminder or what we call standby assist, to full dependency, which requires other people to do the task for them. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to go into specifics. And what I want to do is I want to show a specific example of a evaluation sheet that we use to evaluate a person and their ADLs. Okay. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Okay, here we go. Can you see this? Oh, I'm sorry. I just
Yeah,
got
all I
rid of
see
it.
is our pictures.
Oh, okay, this is desktop too. Okay, I got it now. I figured it out. I'm a little slow, but I'm figuring it out. Okay, so you see a top and a bottom here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is an example of a classification worksheet that we use to evaluate a person's ADLs. This happens to be from Multnomah County in Oregon. Across the states, they're similar. And once again, assisted living, independent living, all these different types of senior care, senior housing options are all regulated at a state level. And so it's really the state that determines all of these classifications. However, having said that, there is a lot of consistency across the states. They're pretty similar across all the states. Okay, so on the top I have the actual classification sheet that they use in Multnomah County to determine ADLs, and on the bottom half I have a more specific dictionary definition that Multnomah County has put out to better define what that specific ADL is. Okay, so let me zoom out a little bit here. So the bottom one here, and I picked this one because they kind of match pretty well. So, for example, eating. You see, we have three categories: independent in the ADL, they need assistance in eating, or they're full assist in eating, and it breaks down very specifically. So, independent, the individual may perform this ADL without help. This may include using special utensils or assistive devices, and they're still considered independent even if someone else sets up the food, cuts up the food, or if a special diet is required. So they're considered independent still, even if they meet all these things. Okay? They're considered assist if the individual requires another person to be immediately available and within sight. Assistance requires hands-on feeding, hands-on assistance with special utensils, cueing during the act of eating, or monitoring to prevent choking or aspiration. Assistance with eating is a daily need or can vary if an individual's medical condition fluctuates significantly during a 1 month period. Now, most people would look at this and say, hey man, that's a lot of assistance. They must be dependent, but they're not. There's a level higher, which is a full assist. So full assist means that when the person is eating, the individual always requires one-on-one assistance for direct feeding. They need constant cueing to prevent choking or aspiration. If a person is on nutritional IV or feeding tube that's set up by another person, they're considered a full assist. This individual needs the assistance of another person through all phases of the activity every time the activity is attempted, right? So we're seeing a little bit of the complexity, right? We're seeing that there's ADLs and there's multiple ADLs that need to be evaluated. And now we're seeing that each ADL in and of itself has multiple levels of designations in order to make that determination that we're supposed to do prior to a person moves into the facility to be in legal compliance, usually in most states. So all of this needs to be done when we first are evaluating the person to see if they're a good fit for our facility. And why do we do this? Because the ADL, the level of ADLs that a person needs, the amount and the complexity of them determines what is an appropriate placement for this individual. So if a person is independent in all their ADLs, perhaps skilled nursing or a nursing home is not appropriate for them. Perhaps even assisted living is not appropriate for them. If they're independent, they would benefit from being in an independent facility. And conversely, if a person is full assist in all of their ADLs, and there's many here, there's eating, dressing, grooming, bathing, mobility, toileting. We haven't even talked about, beside the whole multiple layered of ADLs, there's a whole nother classification called IADLs, which has to do with things like cognition, adaptation, memory. Do they know how to handle money appropriately? Are they putting themselves in danger? Do they pose a danger to other people because they strike? Do they wander in the middle of the night? So there's, beside all of these ADLs, there's a whole nother just as detailed level of IADLs that helps us determine cognition and behavior of a person. And you add up all that stuff together to determine what is the appropriate level of care that this person needs and what is the appropriate setting in which that care should be delivered. Okay, so let me go back to our previous screen, and that was just an exercise in showing the complexity that we have to deal with when we're talking about ADLs.
That's great.
Let's go here. All right. So why do we care about ADLs? I kind of mentioned it already. ADLs determine which facility type is appropriate for a placement. So independent living. What is independent living? What's appropriate there? Independent living is designed for adults, generally ages 55 and older, who don't need assistance with ADLs, but are looking for a living environment that offers additional support. What kind of support? Generally, you'll find that they need help with medication. They need help with setting up appointments. They need help with setting up transportation. They need a more social environment. You can see additional support. They like on-site amenities. So, these are generally places that have gyms, and they have sometimes bowling alleys, they have huge dining areas. There's lots of socializing opportunities, daily, multiple kinds of activities, okay? That's independent living. Assisted living, it's an ideal option for seniors who can no longer live alone but want to remain relatively independent and maintain a social lifestyle. Assisted living provides long term housing for older adults who generally are active, but they need support. More support than they would if they were independent. Nursing homes. Nursing home care is provided by LPNs, CNAs under the supervision of an RN. Often there's a medical director and a doctor who is part of that team also. They provide long-term residential care for people who have a higher, who have more ADL need support, right? They need more help in their ADLs. They're fully dependent in the majority of their ADLs. Those people are not good candidates for independent living, and they might not be good candidates for assisted living either, depending on the specific ADL need. And the goal in nursing home, usually these people are toward the end of their lives or they're severely incapacitated. The goal here is to provide safe, comfortable, caring environment for people who are unable to live independently. Okay, so which one do we pick, right? Because we have multiple options here. We have independent living, we have assisted living, we have nursing homes. Which one should we do? Which service should we provide? So independent living sounds great. Like, you would have to provide very little care, just kind of a little bit of oversight. However, the facilities that generally do independent living, they're very large facilities, 100 plus beds, lots of social programs, lots of activities. They go to the casino, they go to daily outings to Costco and Walmart. They do like tons of organized trips, hiking trips, and let's go fishing, and they do like a ton of stuff, right? So generally that's a bigger hurdle for someone to jump into if they're new and trying to get into the space, right? For a new investor, this is a big hurdle to jump into, to acquire or build from ground up a facility that's 100 beds plus, in order to compete with the national chains. You need to offer better amenities than a person can get in a larger facility. If you're trying to do this in a small facility, you're going to have a huge hurdle to jump over and trying to compete with some of these bigger facilities. Generally because it's harder to staff, to have as much staff as a bigger facility does, right? Imagine if you were the only caregiver, you maybe had another one or two people. Could you provide all the necessary care, the medication management, the meal preparation, all the outings, all the activities, like all of that stuff you would have to do pretty much on a slim team, which is very hard to do, right? So in general, independent living is bigger box type thing, run by larger corporations, really hard to compete against, okay? The other end we talked about was the nursing home, where care is provided mostly by LPNs, CNAs, RNs, perhaps an on-site doctor. The hurdle here is that the majority of the time you need to be a licensed healthcare provider in order to operate one of these facilities. You need to be able to dispense medication. You need to be able to do various kinds of injections, which some could be delegated by a nurse to a non-licensed provider, but some can't. You need to be able to know how to dress wounds appropriately if they have bed sores, for example. There's a lot of complexity here. Typically, it's safe to say that these are usually run by licensed healthcare providers who have experience in this area, right? So, unless you're a licensed healthcare provider or willing to go become a licensed healthcare provider, these are typically not options for an investor to jump into and start their own nursing home. So, we pick assisted living. Assisted living, you don't need to have a licensed healthcare provider own the home, although you could. You are not taking care of people who need a high level of care. So in the nursing home, you're providing care for generally pretty sick people, people who are bedbound. You have to know how to manage pressure sores and wound care, and that typically requires extra staff in order to be able to run appropriately so that we can keep our residents safe. That's usually not the care in assisted living because we're typically not caring for residents who have a high level of medical acuity, so they don't require a lot of care, right? They just need assistance. And the other thing about assisted livings is generally the care is offered in a more personalized and home-like setting, which is great. We all hear stories about, oh, I don't want to send mom to a nursing home. Well, that doesn't exist in the assisted living space. In the assisted living space, it's a home. It feels like a home. It looks like a home. It usually is a home that's been converted and set up to function more appropriately for assisted living. Okay. So, what is assisted living? So, simply put, assisted living communities, they give older adults personalized care in a residential setting. They're for seniors whose health or well-being requires a higher level of support, so they're not independent, they need a little bit more support, and provides a healthy lifestyle and social engagement. Most common services that are offered in assisted living: medication management, assistance with using the restroom, with dressing, and with grooming. We provide housekeeping, meals, laundry, and often transportation services, or we set up transportation services. We have usually daily social programs and activities. Staff is available 24/7. This is dependent upon it's dependent facility to a facility. Generally, in larger facilities, you have 24-hour awake staff. Sometimes, often in smaller facilities, the mom and pop residential home type of facilities, you have staff available 24 hours, but not necessarily awake 24 hours. So there's a little bit of a difference there that we'll talk about in future meetings. But either way, staff is available on the premises 24 hours a day to help with safety, care, and support. And residents are encouraged to make their room feel like home. They're encouraged to bring furniture, personal items, paintings, lamps, whatever makes them feel comfortable. We encourage that, and we hope that they would make their space their own. So that's what is assisted living. That's what assisted living is in a nutshell. It starts with a person who is no longer able to be independent, and they now need to be in a place where they can get some more supervision, more assistance. Usually, assisted living is the place for that, and we're providing non-medical care to these individuals around the clock in a home-like setting. That's what assisted living is in a nutshell. Next time, we're going to dive deep. We're going to keep going. Some of this I know it's been pretty deep. There's been lots of complexity. Unfortunately, that's not going to let up. Assisted living is highly regulated, it's highly complex, There's a lot of moving parts. We're going to go through all of them. We're going to lay them all out. I'll spend as much time as necessary to explain every little piece of it. But that's what assisted living is in general, and hopefully we can tear it all apart and get some good understanding of what it is. Got any questions, Lynn?
That was great. I do have questions, but I feel like you're going to answer them in the next levels. Do you want me to ask you questions?
Yeah, sure. Ask questions.
If I'm thinking what other investors might be thinking, it would be like, okay, well, what's the income difference if I'm going to invest in one of these spaces? You chose assisted living, but what's the income differences between independent, assisted, and nursing home?
So, income differences between independent living versus assisted living versus something that's more acute or that delivers a higher level of care depends upon ADLs, right? So, the more ADLs a person needs, the higher the cost typically will be. And let me give you just one simple example that's based on ADL. Suppose a resident is now losing mobility and they're becoming bedbound. Well, in order to transfer that person safely, you might not be able to do that with just one staff member. You might need two staff members now. And so adding another staff member on site in order to help transfer that is going to be a cost that most facilities will pass on to the resident. And so that higher level of ADL now necessitates a higher price to pay for that extra staff person. And so in general, the more care provided, the higher the cost is going to be for the resident, which I guess is another way of saying that the more income, the more revenue you're going to generate is based on the higher level of care that you're providing to the resident. Now, it's not uniform across the market. For example, in ADL, in assisted living, in a C class or low B class neighborhood is going to be priced very differently than an assisted living in an A class neighborhood, even though even if they provided exactly the same services. Generally, assisted living in a higher, more affluent neighborhood is going to be able to command a higher price compared to an assisted living that's not in a more affluent neighborhood. So the question, how do we determine income? It's based on, it's complex, right? Because there's several factors that go into it. Location, the level of care we're providing, the physical plant itself, right? Like how nice is our facility? Because, and let's talk about why that's important. In assisted living, there's Google, right? People, if you have to place your mom in a place or your dad in a place, the first thing you're going to do is Google and see what the rating are. So that's important. As an operator, I want to have a really good Google My Business score, right? I want to be 5 stars. But equally, or if not more important, is first impression. So if a family drives up to the facility, now we're getting into some secret sauce stuff here. If a family drives up to the facility and it's got really nice curb appeal, that's a win. If you have trash outside, that's a loss. That's a huge, it's super critical. People don't realize how critical it is. If you have nice landscaping, it's super important. People are going to walk in and say, "Oh, look at all the flowers, Mom. Isn't this a lovely place?" And your mom's going to say, "Yeah, it is a really lovely place." That positive thinking is going to go a long way. They're going to come to the door. They're going to come inside. What's the first thing they notice after that?
I'm going to say the carpet,
The smell.
the smell.
The
Yeah.
smell is the next thing they
Oh
notice.
my gosh.
What
Yes.
does it smell like when I walk in? If it smells bad, it's not going to be good. This
Yeah.
your showing is not going to be good. Okay. So that's super critical. Make sure it smells really good in there. The best thing you can do is to bake cookies before every showing so that it smells like cookies when everyone walks in, right? Just positive. You're trying to make the experience and the narrative positive.
Yeah.
The next thing they're going to do is the staff happy? Are people happy? Are people smiling? Are people greeting you warmly? It goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
So all of that happens within the first 15 minutes of a person showing up for a showing, right? And a showing is where they come and they look at your facility and you give them a tour and all that stuff. We call it showings or tours. That happens in 15 minutes. That first 15 minutes is what is going to make a huge, the majority of their decision is going to be made in that 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They're going to walk around. You're going to show them, a room is a room, a bed's a bed, a cafeteria is a cafeteria, a dining hall is a dining hall. So that first 15 minutes, I think, takes up a huge majority of a person's decision, whether they're going to choose your facility or not. The last little bit of what's going to influence their decision is price.
Right.
Are you priced appropriately? Are you offering great services? Are the amenities nice? I mean, people do notice the amenities, right? You want to have a nice place.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things together determine how are we going to provide service
Mm-hmm.
and generate revenue off of that. It's a people business, and it's a physical facility business. What you're selling is the product, and it matters.
Another question I have is if I'm looking to acquire an assisted living and I'm looking on the market or off market, what's a good estimate? Like a medium range, high or low. What's a range for price per bed? Because I kind of know how we do it in multifamily, what a price per door per class looks like. But what are the ranges for assisted living if I'm looking to acquire a space?
So that depends on several factors. It depends on, are we talking about, so in general, assisted living has a mark of delineation between 16 and 17 beds. Okay. 16 beds and below is generally considered residential assisted living, whereas 17 beds and above is still, they call it residential, but it's commercial, right? There's different requirements for the kitchen. They have to have like the fire suppression hood. There needs to be janitor closets with like, sinks and in-ground waste. Like there's more complexity when you're talking about the higher commercial levels. But in the lower residential type stuff, so that 16 to 17 usually for most states is where that mark of delineation is. Now, some states have another mark of delineation at the lower end. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple examples to show the difference among the states, okay? In Texas, you can have up to 3 residents in what's considered a care home, and no licensing, no rules really apply. It's an unlicensed facility, but you're allowed to care for up to 3 non-related residents in a home unlicensed. Okay. If you have 4 or more, you need to be licensed now. You need to go through the whole licensing process, and we're going to go through and show what that licensing process looks like and talk about all that stuff. But in Texas, anything that's 4 or above, in other words, any licensed facility is required by the state to comply with fire marshal's codes.
Hmm.
And the fire marshal specifically says that if you're providing adult care in a assisted living type of situation and you have more than 4 residents, you need to have a fire sprinkler installed, right? So let me contrast that to Oregon, for example. In Oregon, whether you have anything between 1 and 5 residents is a care home, but you have to be licensed regardless if you have 1 or if you have 5.
Mm,
So you have to have a license at any point you're caring for anyone else. You have to have a license. 6 and above is falls under the assisted living residential thing that we were talking about earlier, where it needs fire sprinklers and all that stuff, right? So in Oregon, 1 to 5 needs to be licensed. However, you're not required to have fire sprinklers in any of those houses that are between 1 to 5. It's only
mm,
from 6 and above, right? So it super determines by locality. Okay. Let's talk about zoning also. In Oregon, you can have up to 5 residents, and zoning allows for up to 5 residents. If you want to have 6 or more, like I said, you have to have a fire sprinkler suppression system installed, but you also have to be zoned something beside the standard residential R6 or whatever the zoning is there. You need to be multifamily or commercial. Okay. In Texas, let's go back to Texas, you can have up to 6. So you can have 6 people in a licensed facility. If you want to have 7 or more, you have to be zoned completely differently. You can't be in a normal neighborhood. You have to be multifamily or commercial to be able to house 7 or more. So there's a lot of complexity, and it is determined by municipalities specifically to that city and county and all that. Now, in general, when you're dealing with the care home type of model, let's talk about a third option. In Arizona, you can have up to 10 residents in a licensed facility, and you don't have to have a fire sprinkler system installed,
mm,
right? So it's really, really different all over. But in general, when you're talking about a home, and most of these places that I'm talking about on the smaller end, they're homes that have been converted into assisted living, right? That's
yeah.
where you get that RAL, the residential assisted living. They're homes that have been converted into assisted living. They still fall under residential zoning laws. Some of them require sprinkler systems, some don't, but they're generally homes that have been converted. Now, in those types of situations, the price per bed is generally a bit higher because, in general, people don't view them the same way they do as the bigger facilities. When we're talking bigger facilities, they're looked at much more like multifamily is, right? It's multiples of NOI, and we determine that based on gross revenue minus all expenses. That's not really the same way it works in the smaller end. We would like it to be that way, right? Where we can value a business and do all that. But often in those smaller facilities, the operator is what is selling, is what the sale point is, right? So
Mhm.
it's a much more personalized mom and pop type business where the operator is much more hands-on with the care and with the providing of the care and with helping the residents and running of the home. And so, and the other thing is, we went to war over the fact of trying to sell residents. Like you can't sell people.
Yeah.
So you can't, it's hard to value on the smaller end. It's hard to make valuations on the smaller end. In general, though, if I was to make a super generalized statement, the if you're in a higher market, you're going to be paying more, obviously, because $1 million home that houses 5 residents is going to be valued different than a $500,000 home that houses 5 residents.
Right.
So it's not really a per bed. We don't determine it per bed on the
Okay.
smaller end of the market. We determine it primarily by, is this a nice house? Is it a good neighborhood? Same
Yeah.
thing. You do comps just like you normally would. And then we add on a portion, a multiple of what we think the NOI of the business would be,
Mhm.
generally one how I've seen it done, which is similar but different than what it's like when you're doing a bigger facility.
Right.
Those are much more is B A class, B class, yes, and then bed count and similar to multifamily.